Dr. Ian Player is considered to be one of the most influential driving forces behind Operation Rhino, an exercise that was instrumental in bringing the southern white rhino back from the brink of extinction.
I joined the Natal Parks Board in 1952, the relief ranger. Nobody wanted the job because it meant that you had to move all over the country. But I was delighted because I realized that it would give me a tremendous amount of experience. In 1953, I was instructed to do an aerial count of the white rhino. I spoke to the people who were still doing the Nagana spraying. And there was a chap called Des van der Westhuizen. And he then was a young pilot, and he knew Umfolozi Game Reserve like the back of his hand. He'd been flying and spraying there for years and years and years. And he knew exactly where all the rhino were. We counted 437 rhino. And the great problems of Umfolozi at that time was there was no fencing around the reserve, and the rhino were wandering in and out. And that without the addition of some of the Crown lands, or state-owned lands as they became, there was obviously not going to be much hope for the rhino. There were tremendous problems with people who'd been moved off the farms who were now coming onto the state-owned lands. And there was a terrible danger of them bringing cattle infected with anthrax, which if they'd have got amongst the rhino, it would have been the end of them. But by 1960, we did another count, and it was something in the region of 600. And then I started to worry, because here we were sitting with all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. So I started to lobby at that time for permission to find some way of catching rhino and moving them elsewhere. It took some doing to convince the board of what our policy was going to be. In essence, it was to, first of all, was to restock the game reserves in Zululand where rhino had been. And then from there to move to the other parks in South Africa, and that's when the first rhino went to the Kruger National Park, 1962, I think. And then from there, we started to take them to the Orange Free State, to Willem Pretoris Game Reserve, and then eventually they went down to the Eastern Cape, and then also to what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. By 1970, the board said, look, we've done everything that it was necessary to do. We've repopulated our own game reserves, we've repopulated the Kruger National Park, and they were breeding fast, and the Willem Pretoris, the Eastern Cape. So really, there's only one thing left now, and that we have too many, we're going to have to cull them in Umfolozi. And I remember saying, over my dead body will that happen, because I knew that there were still markets for them. So I said, no, give me the opportunity of going overseas and let me try and sell them in groups of 20 at a time. It was important that we got animals out of the country in a breeding group